Welcome everybody to our program this morning, Rebuilding Jewish Berlin from the Ashes of the Holocaust. You were just hearing a concert from 2019, the Lewandowski concert, which will be explained a little bit further later. But today we're in for a real treat with some amazing speakers. And before we begin, and before I actually turn it over to Fredi Rembaum, who is at our Temple Beth Am, Rebbitzin Emerita. She's also the Secretary Treasurer of American Friends of Zacharias Frankel College. She and our Senior Rabbi Emerita, Rabbi Joel Rembaum, have been going to Berlin for the past 5 years, from what I understand, to teach classes. He even did it this year over Zoom. But I just first want to start off thanking Fredi for putting so much time and effort into putting this together. It really is a labor of love for the both of them. So with that said, I'm going to stop talking and Fredi, I'm going to spotlight you and go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. So welcome everybody. Willkommen in Berlin. I'm deeply grateful to my dear friends who are participating, whom I will shortly introduce. And just briefly, Louis Lewandowski was the synagogue music of my childhood. I was a member of the children's choir at my synagogue in Phoenix, and that was the music we knew. Louis Lewandowski, 1821 to 1894, was music director at the Oranienburger Strasse Synagogue, which is in my background and Leah's background, and you'll hear more about that. If you were to go to shul, when we're allowed to go to shul, sometimes hopefully in the future, the Chazanit in our synagogue at the Oranienburger Strasse Synagogue will be singing a lot of Lewandowski still. So with that, it is my pleasure to welcome everyone. And please, as the program progresses, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. And I don't think we'll have a lot of time, but we will pick a few questions at the end of all the presentations to present to our panels. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Rabbi Niels Ederberg. Nils, wave your hand. Who is educator to rabbinic students in Berlin, teaching Hebrew, Aramaic, and Halakha. He was ordained in 2014 at the Avram Geiger College. Nils is our go-to tour guide when friends come to visit in Berlin, and they all speak very highly of him. So if when life resumes and you go back to Berlin, remember to contact me for his information. Rabbi Gesa Ederberg, please wave. Gesa is our rabbi in Berlin. She was installed in 2007 as the rabbi of the Oranienburger Strasse Synagogue, or the famous Neue Synagogue that you see in the picture, which didn't start out that way, but is now an egalitarian synagogue of the Jüdische Gemeinde zu Berlin, the official Jewish umbrella organization in Berlin. Ordained in 2002 at the Schechter Rabbinic Seminary in Jerusalem, Rabbi Ederberg is a member of the Executive Council and Financial Secretary of the Rabbinical Assembly, the International Association of Conservative Masorti Rabbis. She's also the founder of Masorti Germany and Israel Germany. Deidre Berger, where are you, Deidre? I'm going to assume I have a long strip of people across my screen, so I can't see everybody. Deidre is newly appointed chair of the executive board of the Jewish Digital Culture Recovery Project Foundation, a joint initiative of the Commission for Art Recovery and the Conference on Material Claims Against Germany. She is also former director 2000 to 2019 of the American Jewish Committee's Berlin Raymer Institute for German-Jewish Relations, founding director of the Protecting Memory Holocaust Mass Graves Initiative in Ukraine, as well as member of the supervisory board of the International Youth Meeting Center in Oswiecim, and advisory board member of the House of the Wannsee Conference. Dr. Sandra Anusiewicz-Baer, where are you, Sandra? Okay, is Chief Operating Officer of Zacharias Frankel College, the 7-year-old newest conservative Masorti Movement's Rabbinic Seminary, which is co-affiliated with the School of Jewish Theology of the University of Potsdam and the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies of the American Jewish University in Los Angeles. Therein lies the reason why we are so closely connected with Frankel College in Berlin. Sandra has a PhD in education pedagogy. She serves as the local dean, recruitment director, faculty curriculum coordinator, student advisor, and placement director for internships and jobs, chief financial officer, public relations director, and on the side, she's professor of Jewish education for students in the 2 rabbinic programs. Yaki Lopez, are you here, Yaki? I'm looking. Anybody see a wave from Yaki? Okay, well, hopefully he's here. Is Minister Counselor, Head of Public Diplomacy, Embassy of Israel, Berlin, and who served in Los Angeles, some of you may have met him, from 2014 to 2017 as Deputy Consul General, and prior to LA, he served as Deputy Ambassador of Israel in Kenya with jurisdiction in various East African nations. And so we were already introduced as having spent 5 winter semesters in Berlin. And this year Joel taught via Zoom, and we deeply, deeply miss being there, which is why I keep the picture of the Oranienburger Synagogue on my screen for Zoom. He will join us as soon as he finishes teaching his class with Ziegler students. So our themes for today are history and rebirth, present daily life, what makes the Jewish community unique, and contemporary issues and their impact on the Jewish community. So starting with history and rebirth, I invite Rabbi Niels Ederberg to join us.
Thank you, Fredi. I'm quite excited to be traveling again. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, to be traveling again and to be in LA and LA here in Berlin. 6.5 minutes is not a lot to talk about the history. So the first thing is we know Sephardim Ashkenazim, and Ashkenaz really means Germany. So why are all these Jews from Lithuania and wherever called German Jews before the Yeke? This is very old. And that is because out of a very small community, Rashi and a few thousand Jews in the Rhineland area, over 500 years came a very large Jewish population in German-speaking countries. And times were good and times were bad. There was the Crusades, there were the Black Death, the pest, but Germany wasn't politically united. So when times were bad, the expelled people or the survivors moved on 50, 100 kilometers and stayed within the German-speaking areas. And that is why the Jews had such a strong German Jewish tradition. And just as one element, you might know the most Germanic of German tales, the Nibelungen Saga, Wagner, and so on. The oldest fragment we have of this Germanic tradition is in Yiddish from the Cairo Geniza, because the Jews in Germany had the Nibelungen Saga in Yiddish, as it should be. So that is 1000 to 1500, and then a lot of Jews moved into Eastern Europe, and here history changed a little. I want to make a big step. We have Enlightenment in the 300 years ago, and we have the name Mendelssohn. I guess you know Mendelssohn, and Mendelssohn was the first acknowledged Jewish luminary in Europe. But it's important to understand in the Enlightenment period, he was a kind of missing link, because the idea of the Enlightenment, every human being is equal, would be proven if, and that's a quote, one of the most despised races of mankind could be a luminary, a big thinker. So Mendelssohn wasn't by far not the first gifted and accomplished Jew, but he was the first gifted and accomplished Jew who made it into the European society. That's Enlightenment. The next step, 19th century French Revolution, was that Jews became the opportunity to choose for themselves what to study, how to live, where to work. And as you might know from the American experience, that also meant you had the option to leave the Jewish community. So we have in the 19th century a change of the way most of the Jews in Central Europe, Western Europe were living. And as a reaction to that, we have religious change. So the big movements we have today, conservative Masorti, modern Orthodox, Reform, these big movements came about as a response to a change in the way Jews lived, not because some rabbis had some ideological ideas that Judaism could be something else. And all these variants were a conscious decision to stay Jewish, because now it was easy not to be Jewish anymore. Before that, to the time of Mendelssohn, for example, if you were Jewish, you had to be a member of the Jewish community. Otherwise, you were not allowed to live in the place in Germany you were living. And then we have the, when I say Reform, conservative, Masorti, modern Orthodox, that really were the seminaries. And we have here a picture not of Berlin, but of the JTSB, which means the first one, JTS, Breslau Jewish Theological Seminary, because then the rabbis being trained were the ones doing things. And to talk about the structure of Jewish life in Germany, still today, if you are a registered member of a Jewish community to move to another city, you are automatically transferred to that local community. Because the tradition, you had to be a member of a community, transferred on into, now it's voluntary, but communities are unified. So we'll hear later about that in Berlin, that we are together in one community, Masorti, Reform, Orthodox, which has its plus and its minuses. Now, talking about Berlin, times were good, times were bad. There were 50 Jews murdered in 1510. Then in 1573, all Jews had to leave Berlin in the environment. And our community of today starts in 1671, with 50 families from Vienna who were invited to come to Berlin to rebuild society. And then in 1800, we have 2,000 Jews. In 1866, when our beautiful synagogue was opened, it was 15,000. And before the Shoah, it was 155,000 Jews in Berlin. And we have 55,000 Jews who were deported from Berlin and murdered. We have, after the war, after the Shoah, a few thousand survivors, and then DPs came in from the east, and 53 or so, we had a very small community in West Berlin, 2,000 possibly, and much smaller numbers in East Berlin. And nowadays, after 89, we have about 10,000 members in the community, but it's something somebody else will tell you about. And I'm sorry, but 6 minutes is not a lot to give you information so far.
Thank you. Okay, Deidre, I believe you're on next. Can you unmute yourself and turn up your speaker a bit?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So thank you. That was a whirlwind 6 minutes. Niels, thank you. That was fascinating and important information. I will pick up with where you left off, which was the community that restarted after the war. And I just want to give everyone a little context for this. Just think 1945, what it meant to have Jewish life in Germany. Did it mean anything? Who was in favor of it? Who wasn't in favor of it? There were at one point up to 250,000 estimated Jews in displaced person camps by 1947. But no one knew, did they want to stay? Did they want to go? It was very transitory. And the US government felt strongly, interestingly enough, that it was important to reestablish Jewish life in Germany. The US government, also the Brits and the French, but particularly John McCloy, who was the High Commissioner, met with members of the Jewish community in 1947, and he assured them that the US would give them support so that they could stay here and build Jewish life. But that said, that was very, just a beginning. I mean, all Jewish life was in ruins. The synagogues had been burned for the most part. All the Judaica had been looted. And even the people who ended up staying, about 20,000 after people left for Israel and for other places, there was always this feeling of what we say, sitting on packed suitcases. Do I really belong here? And it's more than understandable. And so the generation that grew up here after the war, there was a feeling of, okay, I live in Germany, I'm Jewish, but not necessarily a feeling of I'm German Jewish. Furthermore, as Niels just explained, many of them weren't from their background. Although if we go back centuries, as he also explained, there was some German heritage. So there was a lot of confusion when I came to Germany in the 1980s. There was a lot of identity issues going on. Jewish life was very monotone, very traditionally oriented, and the diversity from before the war just didn't exist. And suddenly the wall came down. This changed everything. This was really the game changer. And almost overnight, suddenly non-Orthodox life started reemerging. And all sorts of Jewish movements started emerging. Jews from abroad became interested in what was going on here in Germany. And suddenly it was a feeling of, okay, maybe there is Jewish life here. And this was the most important part of the quotient, that Jews from the former Soviet Union were looking for ways to leave in all of the uncertainties following the fall of the wall, and anti-Semitism was rising. Most of them went to Israel and to the US, but about 200,000 or more Jews and their family members came to Germany. And this changed everything because suddenly we had numbers that we didn't have before. And that's what made it possible, together with some very visionary Jewish leaders, including Walter Homolka, who set up the Abraham Geiger College and then the Frankel Seminary to start training Reform and conservative rabbis. Ronald Lauder's foundation set up an Orthodox seminary that trains Orthodox rabbis. There's a cantorial college. There's an incredible infrastructure of Jewish life. But just briefly, because we need to move on, I want to talk about what it means being Jewish today. What does the Jewish community confront? And on the one hand, it's exciting, and I think a lot of Jews in Germany feel that. There has not been a great attrition to Israel, which is very different to France, where over the last 10 years, more than 10% of the community has made Aliyah. I mean, people should always make Aliyah if they want to, but not because they feel forced to, which is, I think, what happened in France. In Germany, this hasn't happened at all. There's been 100, 150 Jews a year who go, but peoples have stayed. And why? Because there is a feeling that something new is emerging. It's exciting. That said, there's still a problem, of course, with anti-Semitism, and it gets more attention, as it should, because it's Germany. And I think the biggest problems are sometimes less feeling afraid on the street, but attitudes that aren't recognized, acknowledged, And that makes it difficult for us in the Jewish community because we don't feel understood always. The German government has in the last year set up an infrastructure of commissioners on anti-Semitism. After the incident in Halle, they improved yet again security at synagogues, not all of which have security, and also at Oranienburger Strasse. Gesa can share that. We've had our own incidents. And yet that said, there is a cooperative agreement with the German government. And I think despite the numbers in the Jewish community, which are relatively small, about 100,000 registered with communities, maybe another 100,000, and still Jews are an important voice in Germany today. And I think we outpunch our numbers, so to speak. And also in having an impact, not just on Jewish issues, but on intercultural issues, on fighting extremism and racism, on general political issues. It's very important, and people want to know, what does the Jewish community think? There are ongoing issues about identity. What does it mean if I'm a Russian speaker and now I live in Germany? Am I a German Jew? That's an evolving situation, plus about 10,000 Israelis who've come, but Yaki Lopez, who I believe has joined us, can tell us more about that. And I think the whole issue of confronting memory is difficult. A lot of the Jews who came from the former Soviet Union came from a country that saw themselves as victors. Understandably, and they didn't have the same relationship to being Holocaust survivors. And this has created a lot of different perspectives within the community here. And there's also a lot of debates about Israel and Zionism as we have in the US, but they reflect differently here, and they've become somewhat embittered, some of the intellectual debates, and where does BDS play in? So there are a lot of different issues that do indeed confront the community. But that said, when I think today as to where we were 30 years ago and see this whole landscape of Jewish schools, educational institutions, seminaries, social work schools, university Jewish studies, it's very exciting. And the last thing I just want to say, because I think this is the best example of what's going on with Jewish life, some of you in the States may have heard of Eurovision. It's like our Super Bowl. This is what the Europeans just love. It's a song contest every year. So the German Jewish community has launched something called Jurovision. And every year, different youth groups in the German Jewish community compete with one another. They rewrite popular songs, and they do dance skits, and then they do videos. And I have to say, and there's like over 1,000 young people involved. There's something so moving to be here. I've been at several of them, to be here in Germany, to know what the history is, and to have these 1,000, 1,500 young German Jews around you with such spirit and energy. It's something very special, and it helps focus on what it means to be Jewish today, not just in Germany, but I think for all of us, how important it is that that link was not broken.
Sandra? Thank you, Deidre.
So I'm next. Thank you, Deirdre. Thank you, Nils, and especially thank you, Fredi, for putting this program together, and also for the lovely introduction. And I was chosen to speak a little bit about the history of Jews in the former eastern part of Germany, in the former so-called German Democratic Republic, because I'm originally from Dresden, which is 2 hours south of Berlin. And I must admit, I'm a little bit obsessed with numbers every time when it comes to East Germany, because they are basically where so little Jewish life. There was so little Jewish life in East Germany. And we really, when we speak about Jewish life in East Germany, we really have to keep that in mind, that we are speaking about tiny Jewish communities, and that after the war, after the Shoah, especially because there were no displaced person camps in the eastern part, there were really also no Jewish communities, big Jewish communities, like Deirdre described, with 250,000, roughly 250,000 displaced persons coming to the western part of Germany. This didn't happen in the east. So when we tell the history of the Jewish community also in Berlin, prior to the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, we actually tell 2 different stories, because the community existed in the West as well as in the East. But there was no official connection between these two communities. About 1,500 Jews survived the war by hiding out in Berlin, and Berlin was actually considered to be a dwindling city. No one expected Jews to have a future in Berlin, and as Deidre also described, most governments didn't expect the Jews to remain in Germany. There might have been some support, but really Jews were actually asked to leave for the most part, and people they demanded that they leave because nobody could imagine Jews keeping on living in Germany. Heinz Kalinski, a survivor of the death camp of Auschwitz, he became the chairman of the Jewish congregation in Berlin West in 1949, and then he continued also after the two communities were united after the fall of the wall until his death in 1992. And in 1953, the congregations in the East and West in Berlin were officially separated. And the so-called Barnes Quarter, which was a neighborhood that was populated in the 20s and 30s with mostly immigrants from Eastern Europe, it was neglected for decades by East German authorities. And those places of Jewish heritage, they were left to decay. Also because there were no Jews to populate these places. And when you think, for example, of the great synagogue that you, Fredi, and Leah, you have as your background picture so prominently, and Nils mentioned it was officially inaugurated in 1866 and only wasn't destroyed during the November pogrom in 1938 because of a courageous policeman, but then almost destroyed through an air raid in 1943. The remnants of that beautiful building were dynamited away in the 50s by the East German government because they simply assumed, okay, we have no one to fill that beautiful building with, and we can do away with it. And that shows you the situation. By the 1990s, the congregation in the East had fallen below 200 members. So when you do the math, actually, especially with the East Berlin Jewish community, the numbers had fallen from 1955 to 1990 by 82%. By 82%. And it was just a matter of time before the Jewish community would have be closed down due to a lack of members. And of course, that doesn't mean that there were no Jews living unregistered outside the official community, but it's very difficult to estimate numbers. And even Erich Honecker, the head of the state, the head of East Germany, he understood the danger of that message. Just imagine the title, the headline, "Last Jew of East Germany died." And so he and his cabinet, they tried to find measures to pamper Jewish life. And one such example was the restoration of the Central Synagogue in the Oranienburger street. So the golden dome of the new synagogue, which is visible from afar, and has since become the landmark of Jewish presence in Berlin. And that synagogue, as you can clearly see, it was built in Moorish style. And like I said, it survived the November pogrom. And with thousands of seats, 3,200 seats, it used to be the biggest synagogue in Germany. I believe even for a while, the biggest synagogue in Europe. And so what happened by the mid-1980s when the GDR state leadership realized that their country was or soon would go bankrupt, they became prone to an old anti-Semitic myth. Jews were not only perceived as being extremely wealthy, but also wielded tremendous political power. And Jews, in essence, ran Washington. So the East Berlin leaders claimed East Germany was the only truly anti-fascist German state, And they sent their Jewish comrades to convince American Jews, and through them Capitol Hill and the White House, to extend what was called most favored nation status to the GDR. And then German Jewish history faced another traumatic turn, because in 1989, the Berlin Wall fell and East and West Germany, as well as also these two separate communities in East and West Berlin, were united. As Deidre explained, the unified German government allowed Soviet Jews to seek asylum in Germany. And in the wake of this decision, some 200,000, 220,000 Russian-speaking Jews immigrated to Germany. And it's exactly that group that makes up the majority of the community members today. Many, however, also stay away from the official community, either because they are simply not interested in organized religious life, or there are problems with their halachic status. Following reunification and the immigration of the Russian-speaking Jews, the 90s saw an unparalleled resurrection of Jewish life in the new capital of United Germany. And that resulted in the country's image to change. As we heard, for decades, Germany was viewed as a place that Jews should leave as soon as possible or avoid. In the 90s, they witnessed that shift. So instead of emigration, getting out of Germany, immigration, instead of Israel or the United States, Germany was the destination. And Germany was soon celebrated to having the fastest growing Jewish population worldwide. And the new question really was, or the new interest, how exactly do Jews live in Germany? And not why would they choose to do so? So in the last 3 decades, I'd say, Germany has developed a positive notion, or the world has developed a positive notion of the German diaspora. And one also has to say that neither exclude Israel, nor makes the Jewish state the only site of Jewish belonging and identity. Despite the miraculous revival of Jewish life in Germany and the growth of the communities, of course, the current situation cannot be compared to that prior to the Second World War. There were, for example, 90 sites of prayer, and this includes synagogues and also private meeting places, and more than 160,000, Nils said, and it's probably more precise, 150,000 Jews living in Berlin before the war. And today the community has roughly, like we heard 10,000 members. On the other hand, the immigration also led to the founding of many new Jewish communities throughout Germany in places where Jewish congregational life had not existed before 1933. So Brandenburg alone, that's the region, the state around Berlin, 8 new Jewish congregations were founded. Already existing congregations grew dramatically. And so just to give you an example from my hometown, the community in Dresden that went from 61 members in 1989 to nearly 750 members in the 90s. And then we have the question, of course, were there rabbis to guide these communities? We're going to talk about that later. I don't know, do I have more time? Fredi, just give me a thumbs up or not, because I can stop here.
Yeah, let's stop here. Thank you very much, Sandra. I want to introduce the guest Halakha professor of Zacharias Frankel College, who just finished teaching his class to the Ziegler students. Say hi.
Hello, everybody.
Okay. And I want to welcome our representative from the Israeli embassy who's here, Yaki Lopez. Yaki,
hi, everyone.
Yeah, okay. All right. So just for your ears, since everyone else heard, Yaki is Minister Counselor, Head of Public Diplomacy Embassy of Israel, Berlin, and who served in Los Angeles from 2014 to 17 as Deputy Consul General, and prior to that as Deputy Ambassador of Israel in Kenya. And there's much, much more, so pardon me for shortening.
That's perfectly fine.
We'll look forward to hearing from you shortly. For right now, I want to thank everyone for talking about history and rebirth. Now we want to switch to the theme of present day life. What makes the Jewish community unique? So we go back to Nils. I think Sandra stole your story about the rebirth of the Neue Synagogue. Is there anything else you wish to add? And then we'll go to Giza and back to Sandra about rabbinic seminaries.
I don't want to tell the story, but I want to show you 4 images that you really get an impression of our shul of the space. So, Giza, can you show the first one?
And Niels, turn up your sound a bit.
I'm coming closer.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, the first image is showing, when it will come, a view, yes. You see the dome of the synagogue, and you see how it rises above the buildings. That was very important to the community in 1866, the middle of the 19th century, to show the city, we Jews are here. And that was the way to do it. And even today, this dome, when you are traveling on the railway, when you are being in the central city, this dome is our presence. Everybody sees it. And they wanted to show it because they were proud to be citizens of Berlin, of Prussia, of the emerging Germany, because at that time, Germany was the Golden Medina. It didn't stay that way, but at that time it was. The next image shows a street sequence. You see that the synagogue is built into the street, and you see even more, without the dome, nobody would see it. And the next one, you see it's a big building, and on the left-hand side, that's what we have seen on the street. On the right-hand side, the right half, is the main sanctuary, seating about 3,000. And it was far in the backyard, because the building side, the plot wasn't really that good, but it was the only one the Jews were allowed to buy. So at that time, it was both in and out. And when the bombing war in 43 destroyed the synagogue, everything was bombed, but only the right-hand part, sorry, Giza wants, yeah, okay, the right-hand part was destroyed and blown up afterwards. The part towards the street was kept. And here you see the empty space, and that is where the main sanctuary was. And Giza will talk about how this memory of destruction now is our outdoor synagogue during Corona, and we have reconquered that space as a positive Jewish space. And the next picture, last one, you see that the wall with these windows was just an interior wall, and half the building is missing. But in order not to pretend that this is a beautiful new synagogue from 1866 and nothing has happened, there was a glass construction made in order to save the facade from destruction in winter. You people in Los Angeles don't know about it, but ice and snow is destroying things. And so this glass is preventing that. And if you see the 3 big windows, the uppermost windows, that is our big room where we do Yom Kippur. And so with 350 people, it used to be the second women's gallery. So what now is a big one, 250 plus people, was just a little thing up at the end of the building. But it is Jewish life. Thank you.
Thank you, Niels. Gesa.
Yes. So after looking at the outside of the building, here you have a view of the small sanctuary. It seats about 100 people. This is where we do have Shabbat and regular services. One more picture, and just one more of our Aron HaKodesh, and then I will stop the screen sharing so that we can talk, and I can also look up and see look at you while I'm talking. We are moving now from the past to the present, so to speak. And if you walk into our shul, and we have many, if it's not COVID-19, then we have many visitors, and I see some faces on these screens who have already been in our synagogue. If you walk today into our synagogue, you think it's just a normal, small, Hamish, Chavurah style, conservative synagogue. You might wonder why women are so much in leading positions there. But actually, we look quite normal. Now, us being such a normal, Heimish, warm, and family-friendly synagogue is actually the big revolution. We started in, 95, sitting around a table at one of our friends, Sunday afternoon, complaining about the boring services, how it's not egalitarian, how it's all organ and Lewandowski and choir and no communal singing, and came up with this really revolutionary idea of we might want to do something different. We came up with a list of 60 people amongst the 4 of us who were sitting around the table who might be interested, called for a meeting in one of the rooms of the JCC, and started having once a month Friday evening service in one of the classrooms. Now, what sounds totally normal to American ears, right? You don't like your synagogue, you start a new one in a classroom, in your own living room, wherever, and then it develops. For Germany and German Jews, it was absolutely never heard of. We had people who came once and then said, no, how can you do services in a classroom, just sitting in a circle without dark benches? You just saw our big wooden benches. You are not supposed to be too comfortable while sitting in synagogue. And how can you dare to just lead services, handing around the psalms and parts of the service between those people who show up? Well, we dared, we did. And after a couple of years meeting in the classrooms, the Jewish community of Berlin officially gave us the sanctuary. Because I think neither Sandra nor Nils mentioned that when the building was reconstructed, still under East German, the East German government, nobody thought of having a real live synagogue in there. Because there is the beautiful Strasse synagogue in Berlin, and they thought this will just be a synagogue for all the American visitors who might come and want to see the place and then might want to step into the synagogue and pray there. So it was standing empty for a couple of years till we came and started services. And actually, when we started, it still had a mechitza. And after a couple of years, some of our members really took the saws into their own hands in order to take the mechitza down. When we started doing children's services, when I invited, being the rabbi there, when I invited the kids to come up to the bima, help undress the Torah, help opening the Ark, people were partially delighted. Young families were delighted. Some other people were shocked because it destroyed the decorum of the service. So I must say that we were okay losing these people as members of our shuls, because there are many other shuls around town with a lot of decorum and very few children. And we focused on having, at certain times we had 3 parallel children's services, one for the preschool, one for primary school, and one for the pre-bar bat mitzvah kids. The synagogue has developed into a vibrant space. Now we are, as everybody else, doing services online, and obviously we are concerned how we will come back into real life. For high holidays, Nils already mentioned that weather was still good enough so we could do services outside on the empty space. We have been doing that all of the summer and reconquered what was an empty space, a memorial, and now today it's just our outside shul. Fredi and Joel, when you come back, you might, you have to come in the summer so that you can really see that, how it is to have services out there. We realized then that we need also more educational structure. The Berlin Jewish community has a nursery school, a primary school, and a middle and high school. So there is lots of educational structure, but we still felt that we need something else. We started the Masorti preschool, which is double bilingual. And I see grandparents of some of our kids who went there. Hi to the Kokins. And we started that as a double bilingual preschool, 3 groups Hebrew German and 2 groups English German. When we started, I said, I want to attract those families who really want Hebrew for their children in order to, you know, give them a deep Jewish education. Instead, Yaki, you might relate to that, I got secular Israelis who were interested in Hebrew. And I went actually once when before we opened, I went to the Israeli embassy to talk to the young families there. And we had this beautiful flyer about what we were planning on doing. And one of the parents said, and I always have to say that in Hebrew, Katuv po tfilah. It says prayer. Are you really going to pray with the children? I mean, he was just in shock, right? So I said, yeah, actually we will. And actually the worst thing that can happen, your kid will think it's fun. And even worse, you might learn that it's fun. So this is what we're trying to do, building Jewish content, building a living and fun Jewish environment for our families. 3 years ago, actually, no, it's going to be 4 years ago, some of the parents of the kindergarten of the nursery school came to me and said, Rabbi Giza, we need to meet. We need to talk. You owe us something. And I was like, okay, what's the problem? Let's figure it out. And then they said, well, the atmosphere, the Heimish and familiar atmosphere you have created for our kids in the nursery school needs to continue. We need a primary school. So in 2018, we started a primary school. We are now in our 3rd year, and you can imagine how difficult that is since, you know, the second half of the 2nd year and most of the 3rd year has been under COVID circumstances with online schooling and in and out and all this. But we are really happy to say that we have nearly 60 children in grades 1 through 6 in 3 learning groups. So we do multi-age education. And we will hopefully also do bar and bat mitzvah training as part of the school and build a community around the nursery school, the primary school, and the synagogue. With all of this, and that's I'm finishing with that, we are also very active in interreligious dialogue. One of the big projects we did was in 2015, working with refugees in one of the refugee shelters. And another project which really is very close to my heart is we are working on building a 3-religion nursery school with a Protestant Lutheran church and a Muslim community, because we feel that this is a contribution we have to do in order to live in peace and everybody together, having this space for families to practice their religion and know each other and grow up liking each other and thinking that it's normal that Jews, Muslims, and Christians live together.
Thank you very much, Gesa. Sandra, can you come back and tell us very briefly, please, about the rebirth of the rabbinic seminaries and maybe a bit about the students in Zacharias Frankel College, one of whom we met in Los Angeles.
I tried to be brief, so okay, well, we heard a lot about the growth of the Jewish community, and that also brought us to rethink Jewish education. And it is exactly in that context that the Abraham Geiger College, a rabbinical school to train liberal rabbis and also cantors, was founded in 1999 in Berlin. It was named after the liberal rabbi, Abraham Geiger, and he had dreamt of academic Jewish learning in a university setting already in the first half of 19th century. And the Abraham Geiger College was the first rabbinical seminary to establish itself on the European continent after the Shoah. So Leo Baeck College, that some of you might know in London, was founded in 1954, but on the continent it was Abraham Geiger College, the first one after the Shoah to be established. And then 2 more would follow. 10 years later, in 2009, the Orthodox Rabbinical Seminary, and our Masorti Rabbinical School, the Frankel College, in 2013. And it was at the same time that the Frankel College was founded, that also the so-called School of Jewish Theology was founded. And that is the project that made Abraham Geiger's dream come true, that for the first time ever, Jewish theology was established at a state-funded German university and could be studied on par, like with Protestant and Catholic theology, Christian theology, and Muslim theology or Islamic theology. And the modern rabbinical education has its origin in late 19th century German Jewish Enlightenment. It's established that dual commitment to knowledge to the classical sources, Judaic and rabbinic literature on the one hand, and modern critical scholarship on the other hand. And all these seminaries I just mentioned are actually heirs of, follow in the footsteps of these rabbinic seminaries from the 19th century. Jewish Theological Seminary in Breslau, where Zacharias Frankel himself became founding director. The Hochschule für die Wissenschaft des Judentums, the Higher Institute for Jewish Learning in Berlin, and also the Orthodox Rabbinical Seminary. All these institutions founded in the 19th century in Germany, and we are modeled, so to speak, yeah, and also the movements that grew out of these modern rabbinical institutions are modeled after them. So, and like Deidre said, the influx of the Russian-speaking Jews, this really was a game changer, and it really brought to the forefront this question: how do we educate these Jews? And that's why it initiated that thinking, the making it possible again, training rabbis. And so the Frankel College is the newest addition to these 5 Masorti rabbinical seminaries that we have worldwide. And when I'm asked about the 2 most distinguishing marks of the Frankel College, I always say we are the youngest in years and the smallest in size. And that's a big advantage because we can learn from the other seminaries that were established before us, and we can tailor our program according to the needs of each individual student. And our student body, although it is very small, it is super diverse, and no 2 students come from the same place. And they speak all different languages that you can imagine. And they do that dual model with academic training at the University of Potsdam, at the School of Jewish Theology, and the practical training with a thorough Beit Midrash, intense courses and internship in Jewish communities in Germany and also beyond in Europe, and sometimes even in the United States. So the ideal Frankel student, what Frankel students embody, is they are strong academically, and at the same time they are a real mensch, and that's what I'm proud of. And I think the Frankel College really epitomizes this development and the growth of Jewish communities and the rebirth of Jewish life in Germany.
Thank you, Sandra. I just want to mention that Zacharias Frankel College has 3 rabbi graduates so far. The Kokens who are on this program, they're very proud. Their daughter-in-law, Nitzan, Rabbi Nitzan Stein-Koken, who is now the rabbi in my growing up synagogue in Phoenix, Arizona. Lorraine pointed out something very interesting, that her ordination, which was the first of Zacharias Frankel College, was attended by officials of the German government. And Sandra, what you didn't mention is in talking about the ideal of bringing rabbinic education and Jewish theology into a public university. Public universities are funded by the German government. So in effect, part of the practical parts of rabbinic education because they exist within the context of the School of Jewish Theology, are also funded by the German government. Of course, we have to raise a bit more money, but that's another story. Last October, we ordained the two newest rabbis, Rabbi Joshua Wiener, who was born in London, and Rabbi Netanel Olhoft, who is Berlin born. Okay, so now I want to turn over to part 3, German-Jewish relations and Germany-Israel relations. And welcome back Deidre Berger and Yaki Lopez. You two decide who goes first.
Oh, I would suggest that Yaki goes first.
Okay, Yaki?
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. And I apologize for being a couple minutes or a little bit late. Had a personal issue to deal with. And first of all, I'm very excited to be here with you tonight. I have this special place in my heart for Los Angeles since I served there from 2014 to 2017. So I'm extremely delighted to be with you here tonight. I wish I could be there physically, but we'll have to do with this Zoom as we've been doing in the last year during this Corona crisis. When I speak about Israel-German relations or Israel-Germany relations, I always like to start from the bottom line. And the bottom line is that the relations between our two countries are excellent, are outstanding relations. In fact, Germany, from our perspective, is a strategic partner from Israel, amongst our warmest and closest allies around the world, definitely the #1 partner in Europe. And these relations come into fruition in different spheres. When we look at the government-to-government relations, there isn't an area that you can put your finger on where we don't cooperate. Economic relations, academic relations, scientific issues. These are all areas that we've been cooperating on for many years, and these things are increasing almost on a daily basis. In 2020, last year, we we commemorated and celebrated, in fact, 55 years to the establishment of official diplomatic relations between Israel and Germany. Between 48, the founding of Israel, and 1965, we did not have diplomatic relations or official relations between the two countries, naturally because of the historical weight of the Holocaust. There was a lot of anti-rhetoric in Israel, and you could see it in demonstrations, and the political will to establish relations was not there, and also on the public level, there was no willingness to establish those relations. But in fact, in '65, we did, at least on the official level. And since the '65, the relationship has been building to a point where, as I mentioned earlier, we have becoming strategic partners. Just when you look at the official visits that we've had, if I just look at the last month, we've had 2 high-level visits just last week of President Rivlin, Israel's president, visited Berlin. He was the first foreign dignitary to visit Germany in 2021, or the high-level dignitary head of state to visit Berlin in 2021. 3 weeks ago, we hosted our foreign minister, Ashkenazi, here in Berlin, and that was his second visit to Berlin in the last year. During his now short stint as foreign minister, since we are going into elections in Israel tomorrow, in fact. Foreign Minister Mas was in Israel about half a year ago. He was the first foreign leader to visit after the corona shutdown. So just to give you an example of how close this relationship is between the two countries. I like to use a few examples when I talk about just the symbolic or how strong this relationship is. On a military cooperation, it's sort of, almost impossible to imagine that the IDF would be cooperating with you could look at it as the successor of the Nazi military, the Bundeswehr. But in fact, just maybe a few months ago, the Israeli Air Force was in Germany conducting military exercises with the Luftwaffe, something that would have been unheard of just a few years ago. IDF troopers 2 years ago were on the ground here. 300 IDF paratroopers were in Germany conducting exercises with their the German Bundeswehr. So you had Israeli soldiers exercising or having training in the forests of Germany, in the same places where 70, 80 years ago you had Jews escaping from the Germans. It's something that it's mind-boggling, I would say. We just inaugurated last month or a couple months ago, we inaugurated an Israeli Navy ship in Kiel and up in the north of Germany. So it's pretty that gives you, just to give you a sense of how intense this relationship is. You have Israeli IDF drones, which are being used by the German military in Afghanistan for surveillance. The German have a contingency of troops stationed in Afghanistan. So that shows you how the relationship has developed in a relatively short time when you think about it. But of course, we have areas which we disagree on. Not everything is we don't see eye to eye on all issues, and most of you could probably guess the two areas where we don't see eye to eye, and that is mainly Iran, of the Iranian threat, where Germany was part of the parties to sign the JCPOA, the agreement on the nuclear issue with Iran, and of course on the Palestinian issue, where we do have differences in the way we view things and the way we think the issues should be approached. But I think what is also telling about the relationship is that we do voice those concerns with each other. We discuss them with each other. They don't they don't strain the relationship between the two countries. And I think that tells a lot about how far we've gone. Now, of course, when you look at this relationship, it is everything that I have discussed in the last few minutes. You have to look at it with the context of the Holocaust. On the backdrop of the relationship, the Holocaust always exists. It is something that is present in the relationship. It is something that I think the German government is aware of and views its relationship with the Jewish state as a very special one. Not a relationship or a normal diplomatic relationship that they have with any other country. It is evident in the day-to-day diplomatic dealings and discussions that we have with them. And it's something that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. Also another issue that is raising concern in the last few years is the rise of anti-Semitism in Germany. we've seen a growing trend of an alarming trend of anti-Semitism in Germany, anti-Semitic incidents, including physical attacks, which the most well-known was the attack on the synagogue in Halle in Yom Kippur of 2019. But I think the German government is very aware of this trend, is very eager to do what it can to combat it. We don't always agree with their approach of doing everything, but we do we are aware that they are eager to try to stop this trend. I think maybe I'll stop right here, and maybe we can move on to Deidre. I don't know if there will be time for questions later on, but I'm happy to answer if there is time.
Thank you, Yaki. Deidre, can you talk a bit about anti-Semitism and also the outlook of the Jewish community towards the recent Muslim immigrants?
Right. First, thank you, Yaki. That was very comprehensive about both opportunities and challenges that we have in the Jewish world dealing with the German government. Anti-Semitism, and there's been some questions in the chat as well, is a real and existing problem. It's a different kind of problem than, for instance, in France, which has been horrific in the last years. It's often more indirect here, but there have been attacks, as Yaki said. I think for many of us, where we feel it is children at schools. It's been a real problem, also because teachers they say it's not anti-Semitism, it's young kids who don't know and they don't understand what they're saying and they downplay it, and that's a real problem. It's a problem in sports for the Maccabi teams. There's almost, I can't say there's no game without anti-Semitism, but it's definitely a problem. It's sometimes a problem on streets in certain neighborhoods. If you can be easily identified as being Jewish, which is not to say that you have to be fearful of walking as a Jew, but that you sometimes need to be cautious in certain areas. The numbers have gone up, although I think one thing that's important is they're being documented much better. We have a quite unusual organization called RIAS, the Research and Information Center on Anti-Semitism, and they've set up centers first in Berlin, and they're now spreading across the country with the help of the German government, and they're documenting it much, much better. So I think there's been an increase even without that, but I think we're starting to get a much better sense of what the problem is. Part of that problem, as Yaki mentioned, is from the right wing, and it's considerable. There's intimidation. There's at memorial sites in Germany. This has been going on for a long time, that right-wing hooligans basically come and create problems at the memorial sites with graffiti, with causing incidents, writing terrible things in guest books, asking questions. We have a new right-wing party in Germany called the Alternative for Germany, and they train their people they come in with sort of half-truths. It sounds like they know what they're talking about, and they completely twist and distort the information. And this is a growing problem with Holocaust distortion. Knowledge of the Holocaust is declining, and it's probably normal all this time. But I think that there's certainly not, I just see someone says we should never stop talking about it. No, of course we shouldn't, and we don't in the Jewish world, but it's a challenge. I think this is the bigger problem, how to connect to young people today who are now several generations past and don't feel any real link or responsibility or obligation. There's still many who do, and all of us on this call can give you dozens of stories of really impressive efforts by Germans to research more about their town's local Jewish history, to fight anti-Semitism. So it's not like there's not a counter movement. There's also a very active civil society movement, many NGOs who are fighting anti-Semitism, and also the efforts of NGOs to fight for better recognition of Israel in Germany has definitely increased. We're much better linked and networked than we used to be. There's much more of an infrastructure than there used to be. There's the issue, I talked about the right wing, there's the issue of Muslims, many of whom, I mean, there's 4 to 5 million Muslims living in Germany, nearly as many at this point as in France. And there are very negative attitudes within that community that are fostered by state propaganda, as we know, whether they're Turkish Germans or Arab Germans or from wherever. We know they're getting bombarded with a lot of information from their own family circles, from media, Arab language or Turkish language media, from influences when they go back and forth to their countries. And it's a daunting problem that often in the schools is not recognized, also because of Salafism, which is can be an extremely violent, it's an ultra-Orthodox form of Islam that unfortunately has been instrumentalized and turned into a very deadly movement. I mean, many of the foreign fighters in Iraq and in Syria have come out of these extreme Salafist circles, and they have been more successful than I think the German government recognized initially. And it's really a problem to fight these groups because there's individual Muslims, and Gesa Ederberg has been great at reaching out. But the Muslim structures in Germany are problematic and have close ties to problematic governments for the most part. And it's not easy to find partners. In terms of the refugees who have come in, we did a survey for the American Jewish Committee. We commissioned a survey of their attitudes toward Jews. Obviously, they're from Syria, those coming from Syria and Iraq. We know that, I think the issue is not are they anti-Semitic, but what kind of stereotypes do they have? What we did find, which was interesting, was that those coming more from minorities, the Kurds who were coming, the Yazidis who were coming, that they had much more positive attitudes toward Jews despite all this propaganda in which they were living. I don't think that there can be a direct link to the influx of these Muslim immigrants in Germany to anti-Semitism. It's a much more complex situation. There have been some issues and some problems, but I think that it's important to remember that the problems are with the existing community that's here, and that we're just beginning to find ways to start reaching out and to talk to them. It's a big issue because the German government has statistics where they claim that 90% or more of the anti-Semitic incidents come from the right wing. But that has to do with the way they calculate their statistics. And we don't believe that's the truth within the Jewish world. We think there is a daunting challenge dealing with the Muslim world, but we do have partners. That's the good news that you don't read about in the States. There are many, many Muslim professionals with whom all of us here who are talking to you have good relations, who are engaged in reaching out to fight anti-Semitism. And so it's a challenge, but there's also partners to deal with the challenge, and we need to strengthen those partners. And the last area that's very important to talk about in terms of anti-Semitism is the left. What we're seeing is more and more of a problem with a problem. It's nothing new, as we know, the interchange of anti-Semitism with so-called anti-Zionism, trying to dissect these two issues, but you can't dissect these two issues. Of course you can criticize Israel. There's no country in the world probably that beyond Israel where there's more self-criticism, and in Germany there's plenty of criticism as well. There's even a word for it, Israel-Kritik, that's considered an official word in the German dictionary, not for any other country. And that's the whole problem. It's a completely one-sided criticism that's exaggerated. And so another concern of ours is that there's a lot of international bodies where Germany, we hope, will play a very positive role representing Israel and its interests. Sometimes it does, sometimes it's not doesn't show the leadership that we would hope for. Yaki's smiling a little because he has to deal with this all the time. And particularly on the EU, for instance, where we believe that sometimes the German government hides behind the EU to criticize Israel in a way that we think it really would like to if it didn't feel obligated to do otherwise. But they do a lot to represent Israel also in these international bodies. I do not want to be unfair. I know too many German diplomats to say that, to say that they don't try. That's not at all the case. A lot of it's behind the scenes, so we don't know about it. I think in general, the German, as Yaki said, the German government is trying. It's doing a lot to fight anti-Semitism. It funds an enormous number of NGOs, of nonprofit organizations to fight anti-Semitism. It's on the verge of increasing funds for all these programs to fight right-wing extremism and anti-Semitism. It set up a whole network of there's a federal commissioner against anti-Semitism, and all of the German states, I think except one, also have statewide commissioners. And this is very helpful because they don't only fight anti-Semitism, they promote Jewish life. And this year is 1700 years of Jewish life in Germany. The first mention that we know of comes from Cologne, where Jewish life was mentioned. There's a document. And the German government is using this as a vehicle to promote more knowledge of Jewish life in Germany historically and today. And it's criticized on some levels. It's a fig leaf and they don't really address the important issues. But I think we do have to give them credit for investing the kind of money that they do. There is a sense of responsibility, and please do not believe that the young Germans are not interested at all. It's just not my experience. I'm a journalist originally, and when I came, people said to me, the young Germans don't care anymore, they're not interested. And now we're several decades later, there is enormous interest in dealing with Germany's Jewish past. There's very stirring and moving stories. It's not an easy route, it never will be, and we never can forget what happened, but we can work together to unite, to fight hatred, extremism, and anti-Semitism. And it's such an important message, because if Germans and Jews can work together, just think what's possible in this world.
Thank you very much, Deidre. All right, we have about 5 minutes. We need to do a hard close. So I've been watching the questions in the chat. I think the only one that hasn't been addressed is Barry Rosenblatt's question about how Jewish community is funded. He's comparing fundraising in Poland to fundraising in Germany. And I want to go back to, I guess, Deidre, you probably are the one to address this. If you can talk about the source of funds for Jewish community life.
Well, actually, if I could, I think Gesa is probably more appropriate.
Okay.
Yeah, happy to do so. So this is one of the points where I, whenever I talk to American groups, and at the end, it's difficult, and you can explain it several times. Germany has, and in that it's pretty similar to Israel actually, has a different understanding of the separation of church and state, or religion and state, than the US. We call it a so-called stumbling separation, which means that there is a cooperation, especially since the German state thinks that there are things which religious communities or political communities or other Weltanschauungs groups, ideological communities, can do better than the state. The state should be doing some of these things, but they think it's better if special interest groups, so to speak, do it, and therefore the state is willing to fund it. Let me give you the nursery school as an example. Running the Masorti nursery school, we get 93% of an average budget from the city of Berlin. Parents pay 23 euro per month for lunch. Everything else is paid by the state. There has been a lot of discussion a couple of years ago. It went mostly by income. Right now, nursery school education from 8 in the morning till 6 at night is free. Also, our school is a private school, but it is state recognized, and we get about 60% of our budget from the city of Berlin, which only we need to comply with general rules like teacher ratio, hygiene measures, fire provisions, etc. And we are still free to do content as we wish. And actually, I personally like that very much. Also for religious institutions, there are several, it's different between the Catholic Church, the Protestant Church, and the Jewish community. Sometimes it's said the churches and the religious communities get state taxes. This is not true. The tax is a religious tax which goes directly to the communities, but is administered by the state. So a person can sign on their tax declaration, sign that they are Protestant, Catholic, or Jewish. That's the three options. And then an additional amount of taxes are deducted and go directly to their religious communities. This means that we are much less depending on individual donors. The regular, the basis is covered. It also makes it much more difficult to do the extra fundraising that is needed, which is something like which Fredi has experience with for especially the Frankel College. The basics are covered, but if we really want to move, then fundraising in Germany is quite complicated. Maybe that's enough at the moment, but it's complicated, and I don't want to make it too easy.
Being one who's always looking for more funds, right?
That's also true.
All right, so we need to close. Betham has to make a hard close here on this Zoom call, but I want to thank all of our participants, Rabbi Giza, Rabbi Niels, Deidre, Sandra, and Yaki, for being our dear friends. We love you dearly, and I'm delighted to meet you, Yaki, and hopefully we will get back to Berlin and have a chance to meet in person. We wish everyone a Chag Kasher Sameach, and it was our pleasure. It was our pleasure to introduce you to the Jewish community and that we have so grown to love. And Leah, thank you very much for organizing this, and we turn it back over to you for an announcement.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Fredi. You really we've been talking about this for months and months, and you've brought so much passion, because clearly to both you and Rabbi Rembaum, this is something very dear to your heart. So thank you so much for all the time and effort, and the panel you put together, extraordinary. Thank you to all the speakers. We have recorded this, so if you know of anybody who would like to see this video, please reach out. We will be putting it on YouTube. It is also on Facebook. And with that said, before we go, I just want to make two quick announcements. Our next program will be April 12th. We will be visiting Paris. And I'll have more information on that. It'll be a morning program. And then April, I think it's the 25th, it's that Sunday, we'll be learning about the Jewish community in Turkey. So with that said, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for joining us today, and wishing you all the best and a Chag Sameach. Thank you, everybody.
A pleasure meeting you all.
Thank you, Yaki. Goodbye, everybody.
Chag Sameach, thank you all.
Bye. Bye-bye.
It was recorded, by the way. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you again, Leah.
All right. Thank you so much. Bye, Rabbi.
Bye.